Today, I'm going to actually take you through, I'm jumping, we'll go back and do the rest of the virus stuff, but I wanted to give you this stuff so that you saw something new, at least for the older people like Linda. And so this is this talk associated with the viral information stuff. And so this will be a little different than anything that you've seen before, I think. So these are the premise for the argument that I'm going to go through. Okay? And there's a little bit of like background that you just won't know. But there is this computer principle, when you're building a computer, there's this thing called Landauer's principle, which explains how much heat it takes to do a computational erasure, basically. Okay? And I'll show you why people think this exists. Okay? And then what I'm going to argue is that we can actually see this principle working in biology, and we can do it only in things like viruses. And then what this tells you about biology. And then I'm going to propose a thing which I call viral information. This is something that you guys all know, so basically there's just a lot of viruses on the planet, but this is your, the reason that we're starting here is to remind you that these guys are the winners, right? Basically, any way you look at it, there's more viruses on the planet, there's more diversity, etc. So they are the ones that are winning. These are calculations that came out of something we published in, I guess, 2003. We're still, to this day, finding metagenomes that are 99% unknown, right? So the diversity is still going up. And even in the human whole biome, right? We've got basically most of our individuality is going to be viral. So the difference between different people, right? Which I haven't presented, but I think you guys know that. That would be the work with Jeff Gordon's lab. Okay? And the other thing is that when you look at food web, so this is kind of the thing. Basically, any food web that you go through, you end up with the viruses, right? It doesn't really matter where you start. You're going to end up as either being directly killed by viruses, or you're going to die and a bacteria going to eat you, and all that stuff is going to end up as viruses. Okay? So, what makes these guys unique? And I don't know if you've ever thought about this much, but viruses are kind of quite a bit different than a cellular sort of system. They pass nothing on physically from one generation to the other, right? So there's nothing that was this that physically had to be part of a virus that ends up in the second generation. Okay? That's not true of anything else. So all cells pass everything on from generation to generation. And it's just like this. So here's basically a cartoon, but right here, your cell grows up, and just before division, right, or sorry, just after division, the two daughter cells are 100% of what's here was there. Okay? And then of course, over time, they accumulate new things and they come up, but then the next time they split, it's the same story. Okay? A virus doesn't actually do that. So a virus goes in, it injects its DNA, that is copied into new viruses, which are released, and those things are totally new, right? There's absolutely no blending from generation to the other. Not one atom has to go from one to the other. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's fundamentally different. Okay? And the only thing else like that is things we do. Right? So only people pass on information in the same way. Okay? And so an example would be sequencing. So we sequence, books are of course the classic, but in sequencing we take something that would be the virus, we turn it into electrons, okay? So there's nothing physical at all. We send those electrons as photons across the internet, and then we resynthesize it as DNA and put it back in. Right? You can't do that with the cell. Everybody with me? Reasonable. All right, and the argument, I think, looks something like this. Okay, so the way to think about this information is it's talking to you about where you are in the universe. So have you guys run across information ever before? Like the concept of it? We read a little bit about it at one point, right? But when you say information, classically the way you're thinking of it is actually in Shannon's information theory, right? Which is, so for the ecologists and stuff, this is when you do diversity, right? So you say that this is a diversity of mind system, that is going to be a measure of Shannon information, okay? What that actually is telling you is that it's the surpriseness of finding something, all right? So if you're out there in the universe, right, and you're just randomly sampling, what are you most likely to find? Right? So if you're sampling just anywhere in the universe and you take a small sample, what are you going to find? Nothing, right? Or some quantum soup that we don't understand very well, right? Okay, and then if you keep sampling, eventually you're going to find what?
Matter.
A hydrogen atom here. Maybe pick up a photon, right? But do you see what I mean? So that you would be very surprised to actually find one of those. To find helium, you would be extremely surprised, right? To find something like Earth, you would be fucking amazed, right? So you would be extremely improbable of finding that. To find something like a tree, right, is completely, crazily improbable, right? Okay, so do you see that? And that's true of how we use it, okay? Now, the way that, that's one way of looking at this. So how do you make this physical connection of that sampling step to what's actually going on in the universe? And this is Boltzmann's distribution, right? So basically, do you guys remember? So this is an idealized version of you have a whole bunch of particles in a box, right? And those particles are zipping around, and whatever temperature they are, right, defines basically the mean of this distribution tells you the temperature, right? So it's how often they're hitting the sides of the box, effectively. Good? Okay. And they're distributed as defined by Boltzmann's distribution. Okay? And the hotter they are, the more you shift this direction. This is your kinetic energy. You can also see, there's other ways you can think of it. And then this is the number of molecules in that particle. Right? Everybody remember this a little bit vaguely from chemistry? Nothing? Okay. All right, and this is actually what, of course, Tracy's stuff is about, right? Because what you're really interested in, at least for chemical things, are these atoms that are, these molecules or whatever, that are sitting in this part of it, right? Okay. So these are the ones that are fast enough to do a chemical reaction, right? And that's what we call EA, or energy of activation. Sound familiar? Yes, no? This is, of course, what you use in metabolic theory of ecology, but the idea is that at a higher temperature you have more things sitting there at the, in that part of the distribution. And what this really means is that if you have two things happening, okay, so if you put a whole bunch of things together and you compress them, right, so one thing that happens is that you actually physically have more of them, so they're going to run into each other more often, so that's your concentration, which is driving mass action, right, so the more likely they are to run into each other. And of course, if you compress them and you heat them up, right, more of them are going to have a higher energy of activation. Good? The big impact is you're compressing the system. So then what you can do is you can get things like this, where you can actually get this able to make an attack on this and form this product here, right? And what's important is that this makes another distribution, right? So it's distributed again by Boltzmann's constant. This would be described by Boltzmann's stuff. Good? Which means that this can then go on and make them do another attack, right? So can you see how you can lead up and be attract? You can actually be pulling things in a particular direction, right? You can never get, if we have A, B, C out here, right? You can never get there, right, without having A, B first, right? And having things that are not part of the distribution. All right. So let's go to Maxwell's Demon, and this is important just for understanding. Okay, so this is this theoretical attack on the second law of thermodynamics, and the idea is what they were arguing back in the day is that you could actually envision something, a hypothetical being, which you call the demon, which could grab the hot molecules in a box and put them in another box. Okay? And so if you do that, what you end up is a whole bunch of hot molecules in one box, a whole bunch of cold ones. You have a temper differential, which means that you can drive an engine, right? Because that's all an engine is. Does that make sense to everybody? So you have a temper differential if you can have something like this. Okay? So it's fairly easy to envision a material that would only allow hot molecules to pass through it, right? So you should be able to build something that would be a perpetual motion machine, right? Because what it would do is it would be separating this, like literally in this room, we put up a barrier, and over time, it would only let hot molecules on this side of it, okay? And then you'd end up with a hot reservoir versus a cold reservoir, and then you let an engine drive it the other way, and you would perpetually be making energy. Okay?